in terms of the policies, I mean, I can't get past, what's happened recently, very recently in Parliament, which is legislation passed under urgency, all stages of a bill. But you just look at something like housing, one of the most fundamental things for people, something that we campaigned on prior to 2016.
All right, hi everyone, and welcome to Wellington Access Radio 106.1 FM. Today we are very lucky to be joined by the lovely Priyanca Radhakrishnan. Welcome, Priyanka. How are you today?
Thank you. I am doing very well, thanks.
Very glad.
Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited. Was it 2 years we've been trying to get her in the studio, Kodrian?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
So she was keen, but we didn't officially contact her. But we met in different conferences and stuff. So we wanted to get here, but now we are here.
Only took us 2 years.
Thanks for clarifying. It wasn't that I didn't want to be
here. That's why
Well, we're very glad that you're here today. You have had an incredible journey serving so many different communities, and I don't think we could do it justice by trying to say it all. So we're going to pass with the mic to you to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about who you are. Tell our listeners. Yeah, take it away.
Thanks. So thanks again for the opportunity. It's great to be here. My name is Priyanca Radhakrishnan. I'm a Labour Member of Parliament. I'm based in Auckland. I live in Auckland. Currently the spokesperson for conservation, disability issues, and the New Zealand security agencies, the NZSIS and the GCSB. So that's kind of, I guess, my focus areas at the moment, but I've worn a few different hats in the past as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So what was your journey into politics? What was the moment that you decided, this is the path that I want to go down, and now you're here? Like, what led to that?
So I guess I'll give you a little bit about my journey here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, firstly, but I'll be brief. So I came here as a young adult. I grew up in Singapore. I was born in India, grew up in Singapore. Anyone who knows Singapore knows it's a really comfortable sort of place. Everything works. And I kind of got to a point where I wanted to get out of my comfort zone and go to a country where I didn't know anyone and kind of be able to, I guess, chart my own course in as much as any of us can. So I came here to go to university, went to Massey in Palmerston North, moved here in the middle of winter from, if anyone knows Singapore, it's 32 degrees always. So that was fun.
Time for us
and to Wellington straight away?
To Palmerston North the middle of winter. And then I've moved around New Zealand, worked with a refuge organisation for many years and did crisis case work, but also lobbied successive governments for policy and legislative change based on the women who came to the organisation for support. So that was my introduction to the political system in New Zealand and how things worked. So I did select committee submissions, for example, met with ministers to, put forth the case for change. I joined the Labour Party 2 years after I moved here, which is reasonably unusual and kind of accidental because my boss at the time was running for Parliament and she got me involved in her campaign. I learned about Labour, the values of the party, social justice, collectivism, the fact that we're stronger as a collective voice. And, that sort of collective support and net, all of that reflected my own values and what I've been brought up with. So I stayed. It never once occurred to me to run for Parliament. Not that I thought I couldn't do it. It just didn't occur to me that it was a thing that was possible. Till I did my master's here at Vic. And I happened to, in one of the papers, have a former senior cabinet minister who was exiting Parliament. It was his last term. We happened to do a paper together. To cut a long story short, he said to me, he hosted us in Parliament and I walked past the debating chamber and I sort of said to no one in particular that I want to speak here. I didn't really mean
it.
So he took me aside and he said, I heard you. You've been a member of Labour for a long time. Have you considered standing for Parliament? And I was like, no.
Stop it.
You're like, what?
You're joking.
And then he said, but you've been knocking on the doors for change for a very long time from the NGO sector. Why don't you try and be at the table? that appealed to me. And so he said, if you decide to stand, I will mentor you. And true to his word, he did for many years. That was Pete Hodgson. He used to be our health minister and labour strategist and all of that. And then when he left, he introduced me to a new-ish member of parliament who was just finishing her first term, who then, was quite a mentor as well.
Yeah.
She then went on to be our prime minister and my boss,
Wow.
Jacinda Ardern.
Right.
So,
That's amazing.
Oh,
yeah.
that's amazing. So, Priyanka, so we'll get more into especially this beautiful history that you shared with us. But let me back into leadership. If in your perspective, how you would define that?
Ooh, that is a tough question. Also because I do consider myself, an accidental politician or an accidental leader, because I didn't get into this to become a leader. I got into it to make some change.
Yeah.
But I think with leadership, firstly, you need to have a vision. So, and for me, it's always, I believe in positive politics. I want a positive vision of, the best that we can be as a society, for example. I think you then need to have a plan to be able to implement that vision. And you need to take people with you, because you're not a leader if you don't have people who believe in both your vision and your plan.
Yeah.
Right. So that coming from an NGO sector and then into politics, right? So what was something like you say when they told you like that idea if you can stand up for Parliament, what was something you say, I want to change something because I've been working on this NGO? What was something like a subject or something that the stories you heard, could be a good platform, I can make some changes?
Family violence prevention. So that's been my area prior to entering Parliament.
Yeah.
Right.
As I mentioned, I worked for a refuge organisation, so women of Asian, African, Middle Eastern origin in New Zealand who had been seeking safety from, I've seen cases of horrific violence. And so that area is really what prompted me to stand, because I've had women that I've supported who have died as a result of the abuse and the violence. That, of course, is the most extreme case. I've supported women who have been raped through court cases. And I saw too many times women fall through the cracks, and particularly women from ethnic communities. And I felt very strongly that there was a lot more that we could do as a country to address those. We have one of the most shocking statistics in the world when it comes to that, And for me, that, given that New Zealand is also the country where women won the right to vote in the first place, we've led on women's rights issues over many decades and generations, and there's no reason why we can't do better in this space. So that was probably the reason that led me to think, oh yeah, maybe I'll give this a go.
Right. Yeah, well, no, that's awesome. I have another question for you. It's about like current politics, which is I want to touch base of the woman's voice in the parliament. So you've been a minister, right, in the previous cabinet, previous government, like when we had the Labour, and now you're a member of parliament and have a couple of portfolio, right? So how you see the difference between now, current policies going on, and then the time when you guys were in the government?
Yeah, good question. And I think a few different things. So it's not just policy either. We've gone backwards in terms of women's representation in Parliament. So let's just be pretty clear about that. We, for the first time, crossed the 50% mark in the previous term of Parliament. And that was largely because of Labour and the Greens. We also had, for the first time ever in our political history, I understand, a gender-balanced cabinet as well. So decision-making at the highest level. And we had women of colour in there as well. So we've gone backwards in all of those. And I think that does affect decision-making as well. Also particularly because women and people from ethnic communities are underrepresented at various levels of leadership, and that is an issue. In terms of the policies, I mean, I can't get past, what's happened recently very recently in Parliament, which is legislation passed under urgency, all stages of a bill, no select committee process, not democratic,
No public
and no public consultation, and it cancels 33 active pay equity claims. Now, equal pay is something that women across New Zealand have been fighting for generations.
Yeah. Right.
And what happened in Parliament last week? We've lost count. I think it was over 30 hours of debating in the chamber. We sat till midnight on the Wednesday in urgency to fight this, because it's a few 100,000 women who are underpaid, undervalued for the work that they do. Our nurses, our teachers, our social workers, support workers in disability facilities, mental health and addiction facilities, who will now be locked out of getting pay equity. They're not asking for anything additional. They're just asking to be paid what they're worth. And Parliament voted to stop that. So now if you think of secondary school teachers, 63% of secondary school teachers are women. What the government did was to shift the goalpost. So you'll hear from them that they haven't cancelled equal pay legislation. That's correct. They didn't decimate the bill, but they shifted the goalpost. The previous legislation, the threshold was 60%. So, industries like secondary school teachers would have qualified. They moved it to 70%. So at 63%, you're basically saying, well, sorry, you're not going to be able to start again. Even those who qualify under the shifted goalpost will have to start work all over again. Many of them have been working 5, 10, 13 years in the case of aged care workers to get their pay equity claim at a point where they get to the ERA. Some were going to settle in weeks. Now they have to start again.
Wow. So it's a lot of going on.
So yes, I feel like we've gone backwards tremendously in this area.
I want to ask you this question. I've been hearing community, they say Labour had a time which was 6 years in the government, and they had a big mandate, especially in the second election, it was big mandate from amount of seats they got in and all of that. There was opportunity to do a lot of changes. I want to ask, what was something different that Labour did not want to do certain things quickly? Like what is going on in this government is everything's going quickly, which is like you mentioned, there's no public consultation thing. So what was the different, how you would answer those arguments, say, okay, there was 6 years there where we didn't see a lot of change. How you would...
I'd push back against that a little bit. I think it's kind of easy to make those claims. People forget, memories are short. It was also a time that was marked by COVID-19, and a lot of what we did when we were in power was to push, to keep our communities safe from this, which at the time was a once in a lifetime sort of pandemic that shut the world down shut New Zealand down. We didn't have a playbook but really the focus of the Prime Minister at the time and Cabinet and our, government was to save as many lives as possible. So there was that. And, we've all traversed this. You would have heard from those who were involved at the time. There were things we got right. There were things that perhaps on hindsight we could have done differently. But bearing in mind that the information that we had at the time was what we acted on. So definitely. Hindsight is 2020. But you just look at something like housing, one of the most fundamental things for people, something that we campaigned on prior to 2016. I remember in the Maungakiekie electorate where I'm based and where I live, I met a teacher aide. This was in the 2016 campaign, so going back a while. But I'll never forget her story. So I met her when I visited a local school. She told me about the work she does supporting children to learn and how she loved her work. But it didn't pay her enough. She'd moved to Australia like many New Zealanders. She'd gotten married, had a child, come back to New Zealand because she wanted to raise her family here. At that point, housing, if you think back to sort of 2014, 2016, housing was a massive issue. We had a huge shortfall. Population had grown. Houses weren't being built. So she moved back here temporarily with her parents while she found a house. Temporarily became 3 years. That was at the time when I met her. She'd been there for 3 years. 16 people living in a 3-bedroom house.
Oh my goodness.
To cope while they looked for housing of their own.
16.
16
my
people in a
goodness.
3-bedroom house.
That's
and
insane.
she had, at that point, that was her last week in the school. And she said, I have to leave because on my salary, I can't afford anything here in Auckland. 2 things that we did in our, one in our first term in government, Chris Hipkins was the education minister, we upped the pay of teacher aides significantly.
Absolutely.
The second thing that we did was to build more housing than any government before us since the 1970s.
Wow.
For the first time, we had for state housing a target for accessible housing of 15% of new builds, which we met as well. So, and then sort of in the cost of living space to make it cheaper for people under 25 to take public transport, for example. Electric vehicles, electrifying the fleet. And, for many years before then, we'd been the dumping ground for the worst of the vehicles. But we know that transport is one of the highest emitters when it comes to carbon and climate change. And under the EV incentives that we provided, EVs became the top sellers in terms of cars. So a fair bit that we've done. I think we tried to maybe do too much in that space. And people don't remember some of... I mean, for me, I can't sit and list everything that we did either. There was quite a lot.
Absolutely. And it was, like you mentioned, there was a time like pandemic and other issue, which is when these things happen, it impact a lot of sectors and there we like different management treatment to...
The other thing I might just add is our response to March 15th.
Yes,
That was, I think, another area that will be a standout when it comes to Jacinda's response as the Prime Minister leading our country through something we'd never been through before that could have divided us massively, but was inclusive. And all of the recommendations after that, I think it was 36 of them that we progressed. So we'd accepted all of them in principle, but 36 that we actually progressed. And now this government's dropped the remaining 8 and dropped some of the ones that we'd already progressed as well. So,
And I know, Arthur, you want to ask a question.
Keep going.
You tapped in another good area, which is when I talk about it. It's social cohesion. So you've been like very active on this topic when you've been in the minister and now. So would you tell us like how you see the social cohesion in our beautiful land of Aotearoa and in your view, and also what do you think that what will be the next kind of plans if Labour come back? How you will empower this social cohesion? How do you vision it for our people?
It is an issue that's very close to my heart. When I've been asked about it before, I've said that for me, the outpouring of aroha that we saw across Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the wake of, or the immediate aftermath of March 15, that's the kind of society I want us to be, where we look out for one another and we actually take steps to stand up for one another.
Definitely,
I think we saw the best of our communities then.
That time,
I feel very privileged that as the Associate Minister for Social Development, I got to lead the government's work on social cohesion at that time. And I'm proud of actually the way the ministry ran it, because we decided that we didn't want it to just be a top-down minister decides or government cabinet decides what social cohesion means for us as a nation. We wanted to include as many voices as possible to not be consulted, but to actually work through what that means for each community and different groups of people. And we got there in the end. It took a while, but we got there in the end. We got a definition, as the Royal Commission had asked us to do, of what social cohesion means for us. What are some of the foundational pillars of social cohesion, things like trust and, in institutions came up, a sense of belonging. Those were some of the things that came up through this whole process. So definitely one that I feel strongly about. I think there's a lot more we can do. We had gotten to a point where we were looking at what does that mean for government? Now we've done this work, then what? Does it just sit and gather dust, on a shelf somewhere? We put out some guidance that different communities could use to take steps to become more cohesive. What is that? Based on what you've told us this means for you, what are some of the things you can do to? We set up a fund to fund some of those activities as well. And then we were looking at when government makes decisions on policies and legislation, how do we now practice what we preached, you know?
Yeah.
So people have told us this is what's important to them. How do we make sure that every decision we make fits in and aligns with the social cohesion principles? And I'm not 100% sure if this government has kept that work or not, because we'd come up with indicators. How do we then measure progress? So a fair bit of work. So one of the things that I'd be keen for us to do is to pick that back up and look at what that means for us. So we're telling people you need to act in a way that's cohesive, then government needs to do that as well. So that's one thing. I feel there's more we can do together with communities. I haven't quite figured out what that would look like. So if people have ideas, I'd be really keen for them to reach out and share what they think. What are some of the next steps when we look at social cohesion for us? Kodrine, you've done a lot of work on this, so perhaps you at some point could share what you think the next steps should be for us as a society.
One of them to have this Kōrero.
Share the stories.
These kind of things, you know, just being in a peaceful manner, you know, share different views and have common things. Because I think whatever topic we talk, there will be something will bring us together.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a difference, but there's the beauty of that difference. That what make Aotearoa who we are. As a diverse community, diverse belief, cultures. And I think it's just what I love it. There was a lot of conferences going on before 2 years or when that, because that kind of conferences, if it's either national or local, regional, is was opportunity to bring leaders and community together.
Definitely.
So that's something can address issues, can hear those voices, can also find a solution. Because as long as you have a space to talk about it, to hear about it, then I think that's a healthy approach. Because you know, without these spaces, without the community, like to be able to come there and say, hey, let's hear this, let's have a space to talk at least about it. I know sometimes solutions take a lot of time. That's fair, you know, there's many things to consider. But when you don't have that space as well, then become everything's on top and top and top. That would be very scary.
You're right. I think having those mechanisms, platforms, spaces to be able to disagree in ways that are respectful as well is key. I don't know if you've seen a recent report that was published by the Helen Clark Foundation that Shamabil Yaqub
just
worked on social
attended his
cohesion.
Hui last week in Wellington.
Well, yes. There you go. I mean, one of the pieces of statistics one of the statistics that stood out for me that was stark was that 25% of New Zealanders skip a meal because of the cost. So poverty is another element of social cohesion. Safety was one that came up through that report as well. Just people, you know, I can't remember, I think it was 42% from memory of people who don't feel safe to walk home at night. Women, senior citizens, and I think it was students was the other. So I feel, you know, that would probably give us a little bit of an indicator of what needs to be worked on as well.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Priyanka, what does meaningful representation look like for you in terms of politics, especially having worked as like Minister for Ethnic Communities? Why is that diversity and representation so important? And do you think there is enough at the moment?
And I'll answer the latter part of that because it's much easier. No,
I
I don't think there's enough of that at the moment. And I'm not just talking about Parliament either. You look at boards, for example. So it's a fair bit of work that I was getting the Ministry for Ethnic Communities to focus on was board representation. What are some of the barriers to ethnic communities being, you know, represented on various boards, community, business, all of that, so governance. Why is it important? Because I believe strongly that those who make decisions for our nation, for our society, need to be representative of the people they're making decisions for.
Definitely.
So government, Parliament more broadly as the highest, you know, form of decision making when it comes to legislation, you know, various other places as well. And all of them, local government needs to be well represented and representative of the communities. The public service has to be representative of the communities. And that's, you know, it's not just words. It's important because if we're talking about diversity being a strength for us as a country, and I believe it is, we are one of the most diverse countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If it comes to ethnic diversity, I would include ability and disability in there as well, accessibility and inclusion.
Yes.
Because people from different backgrounds, contexts, perspectives, bring something different to the decision-making table.
Absolutely.
So, you know, what you've gone through and therefore how it's shaped you as a person and your thinking and your needs will differ to Arthi's and mine.
Yeah.
And they're all valuable, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure that when you're making a decision, that it's actually one that works for your people.
Yeah.
And for that, you need to understand, you need them to be represented and to have a voice at the table.
Yeah.
Right.
And being a minister for youth at one point, that was one of your portfolios, which is so cool. Do you think that young people are engaging with our political systems? And what do you think are some barriers that young people would be facing in terms of engaging with Parliament?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So there is a group, and I'm trying to think now, but it's going back a while now, but we had an amazing group of young people and a particular project that MYD, the Ministry for Youth Development, used to fund, specifically to connect them into policy decision-making.
Cool.
And it's really annoying me that I can't remember the name of this group. The Hive. The Hive.
Cool, yeah.
Yes.
The Hive.
And I've met with them. So it's like a tuakana tēnā model. And you get a group of about 20 in a cohort.
Cool, yeah.
And the one, when I was Minister for Youth, they were working with the climate change legislation.
Cool.
So with James Shaw's ledge, basically. And their... the role that they played was to understand legislation and be that bridge between understanding the ledge, which is often written in a way that many struggle to understand. And then to translate that in a way that young people more broadly would understand. So their interactions on various social media platforms, for example, were tracked and were monitored. And it was amazing, the number of number of youth from various parts of New Zealand that they reached.
Definitely,
who then had a say on this ledge. Many had nothing to do with Parliament or legislation or policy ever.
Wow.
So we need to scale that up so
Definitely.
that, you often see with Youth Parliament and other spaces, young people who have already had a fair bit of privilege and opportunities
Definitely,
are the ones who find out about this and are interested enough and motivated and supported
To apply,
to get into these spaces.
Definitely.
When I was Minister for Youth, I wanted to look at how we could extend that to young people who didn't have that privilege as well. And so I think it's understanding those barriers. What are those barriers for youth? And how do we take it down so that they can get involved? And that's the same for participation of women, of people of colour, ethnic communities. It's understanding the barriers and removing them.
And especially there's so much happening with the current government that now young people are at the forefront of all these protests and getting their voices heard and challenging the status quo and what they don't believe in, which is so inspiring to see young people actually stepping up and taking on those leadership opportunities. What do you think, in your opinion, are some qualities that young people have that make them great leaders that a lot of our current leaders in positions of power don't have?
Energy and optimism.
Oh, I love that. Energy and optimism.
I mean, I just think back to, I think one of the highlights for me as Minister for Youth was Youth Parliament.
Definitely,
and suddenly the place was filled with individuals who were not jaded by life. And it was so refreshing.
Oh, they have hope.
It was great. And just, and it's that, in a sense, idealism. Because... you've young people I find have these ideas and have the passion
Absolutely,
to fight for them. And it was lovely to see that. And there was a session, so we did question time. And many of us ministers, really, you should have seen my folders. I prepped because I knew the questions were going to be quite detailed, and they were. So they were, detailed. Sort of, why aren't we doing this? Why? So it was pretty rigorous, kept us on our toes, but I definitely think the future's in good hands.
Absolutely. Out of all your various portfolios that you've held, do you have a favourite role that you've had?
I'm told it's a bit like children. You're not supposed to have a favourite.
Just like between us.
I don't know if I have a favorite necessarily. I mean, being from an ethnic minority community myself, you know, being in a position at a time in a government that decided to create the Ministry for Ethnic Communities was a massive privilege.
Huge,
and being able to be the minister to shepherd that through and set it up was immense.
Crazy.
I absolutely loved that. But equally, as I've mentioned, you know, aspects of being the Minister for Youth, Associate Minister for Social Development. As Associate Workplace, we did a lot of work on pay transparency. How do we improve equal pay for women? So I don't know that I have a favorite portfolio, but each one has had highlights. Disability issues was the most complex, and I don't think people appreciate just how many moving parts there are. Plus, at that point, it was $2.3 billion of contracting money, of, you know, funding to disability support services, and just the diversity and complexity of need in that space was mind-blowing. So I think that's the one that I found the hardest.
Wow.
And I only held it for 6 or 7 months, so I'm still shadow spokesperson for that, which I
we love that.
So if Labour come back to the government, which portfolio you will be fighting for and want to be that?
Look, that happens behind closed doors.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I'm going to shoot myself in the foot by saying it here. I think it should be pretty obvious given the ones that I'm really vocal about at the moment.
Definitely.
Although, you know, the security agencies is an interesting one. I really wanted to get into that space because of March 15th, because of I was leading a piece of work as Ethnic Communities Minister on foreign interference. It's one that we didn't talk about a huge amount at that point in time, but it was a new piece of work, looking at it from a social cohesion lens. How do we work with communities to build resilience against foreign interference? And that piece of work really got me interested in the areas of, you know, extremism and terrorism and counterterrorism and foreign interference and all of that. And that's my interest in the security agencies. But it's a tough one in opposition because you don't have NGOs and stakeholders you can go and talk to, you know, about this. So, I don't know that I can necessarily pick one, I'm afraid. We also have a wee while to go before the next election. So I'm more focused on doing my job currently as the opposition spokesperson as well as I can.
So running time fast, but let's make space for 2 more questions. One of them I really want to ask you, which we should ask it from the beginning when we did the intro. It's about, I think you were the first Indian heritage as an MP? Minister.
Wow.
So how you will balance that when you were going to the community? There was a lot of pressure because, you know, we come from communities. She's a minister. She can do a lot of things to us.
Or the family putting in requests for you.
That kind of stuff.
Fix my roads.
So how was your experience and how did you see the balance between like in New Zealand, the work you did and also facing community? How was that experience if you want to share a little bit about that?
I mean, it wasn't massively different for me necessarily because that was my second term when I became a minister. It's been fascinating. This is my 3rd term in Parliament, and each term has been different. So, you know, your first term, you're figuring out what your levers are. You're building those relationships or strengthening them with the communities that you work with typically. And then second term as a minister. So I'm still me, right? Like it's a role. And I was acutely aware of the fact that when you're a minister, it's a privilege to be in cabinet and to be in some of those decision-making spaces, but it will pass at some point. So I wanted to still, I don't know if I'm doing this question justice, but I didn't really change the way I interacted with people. I was still the same, you know. And in terms of managing, yes, I was on APH, which is the cabinet committee that decides on honours. That was probably where the most tension lay. But I'm very clear the New Zealand honours system means that someone is, you know, nominating you for the work you've done, you know, and we need to maintain the integrity of that system. So I wouldn't discuss it with anybody outside of cabinet committee. So, I mean... my interaction didn't change. I stick to my values. I'm there for a purpose. And interact with everyone. You have to be a little bit more careful when it comes to, I guess, being perceived to be doing things that perhaps you shouldn't be doing as a minister, or, favoritism or favors. There are things that Cabinet Manual tells you can't do, so that's different.
Yeah.
Minister versus MPs, you can't. I'll give you a little example. So often as an Indian MP or a minister, you're invited to the opening of lots of businesses and restaurants and things like that.
Yes.
And often you'll go because you're supporting your community.
Definitely.
But suddenly when you're a minister, you have to be really careful about these things, because the Cabinet Manual doesn't allow you to promote a certain product or business. And you can be perceived to be. So I can say I'm at this restaurant and it's great, but I can't say you should come eat here, which I can say as an MP. So it's a different sort of, you have to think through things differently.
Yeah.
And that sometimes was a little bit of a struggle, because you suddenly have to be like, plus you're juggling that with you being yourself. So a bit of a minefield, but one needs to be careful.
Right, yeah. You remind me with some American politics, which is stupid. The Korean one is doing totally opposite. It's all about their product. Anyhow.
No
Moving
comment.
along.
No comment. Okay. So, that was great, Arti.
Yeah.
For you.
Well, we are Voice of Aroha, so we would like to ask you to tell our listeners one message of aroha that you have for them to leave them feeling a bit more hopeful, especially with everything, or the hecticness and craziness that has been happening recently. What is your message?
This too shall pass,
This too
and
shall
you
pass,
have an opportunity next year in 2026 to vote this lot out and bring in some hope.
Awesome.
Well, we do this with all our guests, and we get our previous guest to write a question to our next guest, even though they have no idea what it's going to be. And this one is actually quite crazy, because if you were the president or the prime minister for a day, what would you do?
Let's come to the right politician.
What a coincidence.
Oh my God, I'm usually asking people that.
What would you tell?
God, I have to pick one thing?
Yeah, only one.
And one day?
I mean, all right. The area that I'm invested in at the moment, right, is ensuring that disabled people and disability communities get the services they need in a way where they have more choice and control over those services. I'd want to create a system that allows them to do that if I was PM.
Amazing.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Priyanka, for taking your time out of your very busy schedule to come and talk with us. And we can finally say we interviewed Priyanka, and we can add her to our wall of fame. So thank you so much. We have loved talking to you, and
Thank you.
our listeners will love hearing this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
both as well.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
opportunity. And that was a slightly flippant comment in terms of my message.
Yeah.
My real message would just be thank you, because although there's so much turbulence in various decision-making spaces currently, there's so much incredible work happening at the grassroots.
Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge that that's really where the hope is.
Kia ora.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Ka kite.